Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. So far, I've got to experience War Within fairly thoroughly, from the alpha release to the beta update, and now with the actual official release and this Season 1 content right over the horizon. I feel like now it's about a good time to start doing some of the guides for the class that I decided to main for this expansion, which is, of course, the Rogue. Initially, I wasn't even going to pick the Rogue for this expansion. Early alpha and beta, we definitely started out right down into the dumps, but over the last few weeks and towards the tail end of the development cycle, we have gotten better and better. With majority of bugs fixed, though not all, Rogue is now in a playable state. So I wanted to start things off by covering the spec that I think is probably going to get the most amount of play within the new raid of the War Within expansion. As always, if you want to see more War Within guides like these, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right deep into the Assassination Rogue for the War Within Season 1. Now, out of all the classes in World of Warcraft, Rogue isn't the one class that I recommend for a lot of newer players, but if you are still interested in exploring the class of Rogue, I think Assassination is a great starting point. What separates Assassination apart from all the other Rogue specs is their emphasis on damage over time through bleeds and poisons, which is how they deal a lot of their sustained damage, but also pretty big emphasis on their major cooldowns with a 1 minute and a 2 minute damage profile, which is flexible in most forms of PvE content. Rogue as a class manages 2 resources of energy and combo points, but you also manage other things like buffs and debuffs and a lot of tracking in order to be able to play this class at the most optimal of levels. Assassination Rogues didn't really change too much going into the War Within expansion, so if you played this class during the later ends of Dragonflight, it's about the same. But also Assassination didn't really change too much over the last few expansions. Going into War Within, though, we do gain a new mechanic of hero specs or hero talents that add a little bit extra flavor to each class and spec in the game, but also some talents that help encourage you into a specific direction when it comes to your class talents or even spec talents and add an extra layer of overall gameplay. For Rogues, these are mostly passive, but for Assassination, that choice can still be quite meaningful. Deathstalkers thematically are agents of death, and they are all about planning out a meticulous way to be able to take out their targets, and they're going to have mostly a singular focus kind of gameplay with a more emphasis on single target damage, but also some resource heaviness, like you'll want to commit full combo points into an Venom in order to proc your capstone, but the reward for it is going to be more than worthwhile. Fatebound are a little bit less meticulous compared to Deathstalker thematically. Their playstyle is a little bit less rigid, but they still play around this finisher based gameplay just like Deathstalker with his Deathstalker's Mark ability, which we'll talk about in a second, but they play around the ability Hand of Fate. Anytime they consume at least 5 combo points into a finisher, they flip a coin, either dealing instant cosmic damage to the enemy or increasing the output of their own damage, which either way ends up benefiting them greatly. But first, we have some of the basic talents to get into, starting with the raiding build for the Deathstalker. If you're brand new to the Rogue, I would definitely take some time to read over all of the different talents and get familiarized to this. But for the most part, I am going to focus on the actual builds in order to help you get started and get you playing the class as soon as possible. The base on Assassination is going to play around Dragon Temper Blades, allowing us to pick up both the Deadly Poison as well as the Amplifying Poison on our weapons. This synergizes together incredibly well with Kingsbane, which continues to be the playable option heading into this expansion. We also did see an adjustment to Serrated Bone Spike. Instead of being an active ability, it now procs passively whenever you place a Rupture on an enemy target. So if you're generating more combo points after a Rupture, don't be surprised, it's just Serrated Bone Spike doing something more passively. So the actual raiding build for Assassination isn't going to be all that different than the last expansion of Dragonflight, but we are going to make some talent adjustments because of the Deathstalker mechanic. The main mechanic for Deathstalker is going to come from the Deathstalker's Mark passive ability. When you ambush an enemy from stealth, which means you'll want to make sure to ambush enemies from stealth at all times, you'll apply 3 stacks of Deathstalker's Mark to your target. You may only have 1 target with a Deathstalker's Mark. Anytime you spend 5 combo points into a finisher against the marked target, you consume a stack of Deathstalker's Mark, dealing instant plague damage to the target while also empowering your next ambush or immunity by 50%. Because we want to get through all these stacks of Deathstalker's Mark as efficiently as possible, we'll be picking up the talent of Echo and Reprimand as well as Resounding Clarity to get a little bit more efficiency in our combo point building, but also more finisher spending. Because Deathstalker's Mark ability amplifies the damage of your next ambush and mutilate, this gives us a reason to run Talent of Vicious Venoms, which generally is a little bit lukewarm, but because of this it has a natural synergy with the way that Deathstalker's Mark works. Deathstalker's Mark, once you finish up and use up all 3 stacks of Deathstalker's Mark, you gain the talent of Darkest Night, or rather the capstone effect. When you immediately gain 40 energy, and your next Venom cast with max combo points will be a guaranteed crit, dealing maximum damage, while reapplying 3 stacks of Deathstalker's Mark to start the chain and the rotation all over again. Now, this does not work with the ability of Echo and Reprimand, so you'll want to invest quite a few combo points in order to make sure that you're sitting at max, but that is going to be how you're going to be able to create the basic gameplay loop of Deathstalker's Mark between putting up the charges, consuming those 3 stacks, getting Darkest Night, to then reapply all those marks all over again on the target. The rest of the Deathstalker's talents are not really all that impactful. Most of them are passives that do provide damage bonuses. There is clearly the Witnesses, which is generally maybe somewhat useful in single target, where you may want to think about using Phantom Knives in pure single target, though if we are running the talent of Vicious Venoms, there's a little bit less reason to use Clear the Witness, at least in the current sims. As for the actual choice notes of Deathstalker, the first option is going to be Linger in Darkness or Symbolic Victory, though Linger in Darkness is the stronger option at the current moment. Defensively, you can pick between Ethereal Cloak or Bait and Switch, and I generally like to have the flexibility of Bait and Switch, where evasion can be used against magic damage, and Cloak of Shadows can also be used against physical damage. Below that, we have a choice between Follow the Blood or Momentum of Despair, and right now Momentum is significantly better than the alternative in AoE content. The final one is really up to you. You could either have Shadow Consuming Duration increased by 5 seconds, or have some cooldown reduction around your Shadow Step ability, which may be a little bit better if you're looking for more mobility. The AoE variation of this talent tree is going to go into things such as Crimson Tempest for additional bleed damage to multiple targets, as well as Caustic Spatter. So if you played in previous expansions, nothing really new to mention here. You're also going to be picking up Indiscriminate Carnage so that your Garrotes and Ruptures can cleave during your opener, allowing you for better bleed widespread pressure. When playing as the Fatebound Rogue, as we mentioned before, the Hand of Fate ability allows you to flip a coin every time you consume 5 combo points. It doesn't matter which target you consume it on, anytime you spend finishers 5 combo points into a finisher, you flip a coin, which either deals instant damage to your current target or increases your damage. This effect can stack. The idea is you want to try to stack those coins up until you can hit 7 stacks of the same coin, either all 7 stacks of tail or 7 stacks of heads, in order to proc Fateful Ending. Once you get 7 coin flips of tails or heads in a row, you gain 7% more agility, and any other time you get another stack of 7 of tails or heads, you will also be able to deal instant cosmic damage to the current target. We'll be trying to leverage Fatebound in certain ways in order to try to gain as many chains of coin flips, either as all tails or all heads. There's a couple of ways that Fatebound does this. One is Mean Streak. Every time coins are flipped by using an Envenom, there's a slightly higher chance that it will be able to match the same side as the one you just had. So if you flip tails and use Envenom, you're more likely to keep landing on tails. We can also control these coin flips, like coming out of stealth. It allows you to flip 2 coins that are guaranteed to match the same face every single time. After using the ability of Deathmark, it causes your next Fatebound flip from a finisher to land on an edge, counting as both heads, which allows you to further increase the stacks towards a certain direction. Finally, we'll be picking up the talent of Inevitability, which modifies Cold Blood and gets us a reason to play Cold Blood instead of Echo and Reprimand compared to Fatebound versus Deathstalker. With Cold Blood, it allows our Cold Blood to only apply to our next 2 Envenoms, but those Envenoms will always flip a coin that will match the same side that we had before, essentially allowing us to get those stacks of coins and achieve Fateful Ending much more consistently. Besides this, the choice notes for this are going to be either additional leech or damage reduction with Temper to Fate, which is a lot stronger, either a little bit better mobility with an Inexorable Much if you're able to flip same coin side, but it's not as good as Death Arrival when it comes to raw damage. And the final choice, Inevitability, is kind of a must-play pick for Fatebound Assassination specifically, so this one is a locked-in option. As for the talents in single target, we're not really doing anything differently. We're still Dragon Temper Blades as well as Kingsbane. We do make a slight adjustment to go Sanguinating Blades, and we're not playing into Vicious Venoms, but we no longer have any kind of mechanics that make us want to play into Vicious Venoms, since it is, like I said before, a little bit of an underwhelming talent from before. And the Mythic Plus variation of Fatebound is exactly the same as the Deathstalker variation, so nothing necessarily changes there specifically. Now, all the different builds that I mentioned in this video so far, you can actually import them directly onto your character right now if you want to try them out. in the description of this video, but also in the written guide in our Discord channel. I'll have every single one of these talent codes linked for you to import directly. To import the code, you have to first copy it, and then you have to hit it into the import section, name the build whatever you want to, like Deathstalker single target raid build, if you could spell Deathstalker correctly. Sometimes I can never do it. And then import it directly, add it into the game, and drop it in without having to pick out all the talents specifically. Just import it directly. You'll find links to those in the description of this video, but also in our written guide in the main channel Discord. So when it comes to the rotation and the playstyle, I was having a hard time trying to figure out how I want to structure this video, but I think I got a pretty good idea of how I want to show it off, where I want to go over the basics and build out the foundation of how you play Assassination, and then keep building upon that from there, starting with the rotation for single target damage combat. First things first, as an Assassination rogue, make sure you have all of your poisons enabled immediately before you dive into any combat scenario, because weapon poisons is going to be a huge portion or a huge component of your overall damage output. We're going to start off very basic with pure single target, starting with the ability of Mutilate, which is going to be your primary and very basic combo point builder in pure single target situations. Mutilate as an ability costs 50 energy, and it's an attack that strikes both with your daggers, your main hand dagger and your offhand dagger, and awards you 2 combo points. However, because Assassination Rogue plays around the talent of Seal of Fate, any ability that generates combo points, if those abilities crit, for every attack that crits, it generates an additional combo point. Because Mutilate strikes with both weapons, your main hand and offhand, if one of your daggers crits, instead of generating 2 combo points, it becomes 3 combo points. If both daggers crit, then it becomes 4 combo points. So it's not uncommon for Mutilate to generate you a unusual amount of combo points. As you use Mutilate, sometimes you'll notice that the ability actually switches to the ability of Ambush. This is because we're playing around the talent of Blindside, where Ambush and Mutilate all have a chance to turn your next Mutilate into an ambush that's also free of energy. Ambushes on their own deal quite a bit of damage and will generate 3 combo points thanks to improved ambush. It's kind of like a stronger version of Mutilate in a way, or I guess that's the way you could think about it. So when your Mutilate becomes a ambush, you just would use it like it's a Mutilate. As an Assassination rogue, you're going to focus on building combo points up until you have about 5. And once you have 5 combo points, you're going to want to start investing those points into finishers. Your strongest and the best finisher is going to be Envenom. It's an ability that causes your weapon poisons to immediately be applied to the damage of Envenom, which deals pure nature damage. And then afterwards, Envenom gives you a buff where you will actually be able to have a higher chance to reapply your weapon poisons from your weapon abilities and auto attacks. Every single one of the weapons you apply to the enemy has an instant damage component, as well as damage over time or an amplification up component with amplifying poison. And Envenom ends up being a huge portion of your overall damage. Now, we're not just gonna spam Envenom. In fact, there's actually a couple of other abilities that are on a higher priority than Envenom. Even though Envenom is going to be a good portion of your overall damage, all those other abilities actually benefit Envenom. Because to use Envenom, we need a lot of energy. And if we just keep spamming Mutilates and Envenoms, we run out of energy very quickly. So to recuperate that energy, we'll be utilizing the talent of Venomous Wounds in order to regain that energy, where you can gain 8 energy each time bleeds, such as Garrote or Rupture, deal bleeding damage to a poison target. The ability of Garrote is a 45 energy cost ability with a 6-second cooldown that bleeds the enemy, dealing damage over 18 seconds. Garrote also generates 1 combo point. Though it can't benefit from Seal the Fate, it'll at least generate a single combo point guaranteed every time you use it. The other ability is going to be a finisher similar to the Envenom ability, and that is Rupture. Rupture deals a set amount of damage with its duration determined by how many combo points you invest into this ability. Just like in Venom, once you reach 5 or more combo points, then it's worth investing combo points into Rupture, and you want to maintain Rupture and Garrote on the target at all times, making sure to never let those abilities fall off. This is how you're going to be able to gain a ton of energy for your rogue, so you can spam more Mutilates, more Envenoms to continue doing as much damage as humanly possible. However, you also want to make sure to refresh those blades when they're about to fall off. When you see either Garrote or Rupture at about 6 seconds or less duration left over, you can then refresh it because of a mechanic called Pandemic. When a dot is about to expire, when it has a handful of seconds left over, if you apply a fresh version of the dot, those leftover seconds carry over and get added into the new instance of the dot. So as Rupture gets closer to 6 seconds, and if I refresh it with full combo points, those 6 seconds actually carry over into the new Rupture. This allows you to maintain 100% uptime on your damage over time abilities without ever wasting them. Now, you got your Garrote and you got your Rupture, so that's going to be energy, but now you got to maintain another buff called Slice and Dice. Slice and Dice is a buff rather than a debuff that increases your auto attack speed by 50%. When you attack enemies quickly with your daggers, that's a lot more opportunity for you to be able to poison the enemy, which is a huge portion of our overall damage. However, managing your Rupture, your Garrote, and Slice and Dice can be quite tedious, but to make it easier to manage Slice and Dice, we have a passive talent called Cut to the Chase, where Envenom will extend the duration of Slice and Dice by 3 seconds per comp point spent. So you don't really need to invest a lot of comp points into a Slice and Dice. In fact, if you want to just build a few comp points and throw it into a Slice and Dice, then build comp points and then press Envenom, Envenom will basically refresh your Slice and Dice to its full duration. So Slice and Dice only needs to be established initially without a lot of comp point and resource investment, and then you can maintain the ability from there on by using Envenom. And from there, you're playing Assassination Rogue using Mutilate or Ambushes in order to generate comp points. Once you have all the comp points available, you will start refreshing your dots when they're about to fall off. When dots don't need to be refreshed, you'll sink the rest of your comp points into Envenoms. And that's going to be the general basic gameplay, or at least the basic rotation of an Assassination Rogue, at least in pure single target content. From there, though, we can expand that rotation into AoE, where instead of using Mutilate when we're hitting more than 3 targets, we're going to be using the ability of Fan of Knives. Fan of Knives is very similar to Mutilate, but it costs a lot less energy. Instead of generating 2 comp points, it generates 1 comp point. But like before, we saw with Mutilate and how it interacts with critical strikes like Seal of Fate, Fan of Knives does exactly the same thing. While the ability natively generates only a single comp point, it can generate more for every target that it hits that lands a critical strike. So it's not uncommon to use a Fan of Knives in a big group situation and just be completely capped of comp points immediately with a single use of this ability, which is why critical strike as a stat becomes even but that much better for the spec of Assassination Rogue. And from there, we can kind of build up on all the other elements that we've learned before when it comes to Assassination. Another element that's worth adding when it comes to AoE content is you're probably going to be running the talent of Crimson Tempest when it comes to dungeons. Crimson Tempest is yet another bleed finisher that doesn't exactly interact like Garrote or Rupture, as in you don't get the benefits of Venomous Wounds using this ability. But it does deal a significant bit of AoE damage, with its damage scaling per enemy that it strikes. Crimson Tempest is an ability that's a higher priority finisher that deals a considerable amount of damage in AoE content, and you should try to maintain this ability at all times and try to refresh it within a handful of seconds before it falls off whenever you're fighting 2 or more targets. But the rest of the gameplay and rotational abilities still apply from before. You'll still want to maintain at least a Garrote and a Rupture. In fact, in AoE content, you want to try to maintain at least 5 instances of either Garrotes or Ruptures. So if you want to have like 4 Ruptures and a single Garrote, that's perfectly fine. If you want to have 5 Ruptures, that's perfectly fine. Though having more than 5 of those bleeds out ends up making Venomous Wounds a little bit more wasted, because then you generate way too much energy, then you can spend it. From there, you kind of want to, once you have all those bleeds established, you want to use most of your comp points offensively. Now, the way we're going to do that is by incorporating the ability of Mutilate back into the rotation. Because in AoE dungeon content, we'll be running a talent called Caustic Spatter. Using a Mutilate on a target afflicted by Rupture and Deadly Poison applies Caustic Spatter on them for 10 seconds. While Caustic Spatter is active, all single target nature damage to that target is now cleaves and splashes onto nearby foes. This allows us to use abilities such as Envenom, primarily a single target ability, but when used against a target with Caustic Spatter, now Envenom cleaves everything around you. So now we combine all those tools together. We combine the bleeds such as your Crimson Tempest, your Garrotes, as well as getting as many Ruptures on at least up to 5-ish targets if possible, and then from there you try to maintain the debuff of Caustic Spatter instead of using it aggressively, then build comp points with Fan of Knives and try to sink it on as many Envenoms as possible in AoE content. Also, don't forget Slice and Dice. That still does need to be maintained. Even if you're cleaving multiple targets in AoE, you still want to maintain that ability as best as possible. From there on, we can move on into talking about the many cooldowns that Assassination Rogues have to manage. And they're rather simple, though all of them do have a bit of intricacy in how they all function and which cooldowns can be tied together in order to make more for effective burst. The primary cooldown that all Assassination rogues should be aware of is Deathmark. Deathmark is a bleed that you carve into the target and it lasts for 16 seconds. While the enemy is marked by Deathmark, your garrotes, your ruptures, and all lethal poisons applied to the target are then duplicated at 100% of normal damage, causing all of your debuffs to then be doubled up on the enemy target. As soon as you hit Deathmark, you'll now see that now there's 2 instances of garrote, 2 instances of rupture, and a double instance of all of your basic poison effects, which allows you to benefit from double the effectiveness of all the elements of these abilities. So things such as venomous wounds are double as effective since you have 4 versions of bleeds instead of just 2. Therefore, you're encouraged to heavily spend as much energy as possible during Deathmark windows and be as active as you can when it comes to managing all of your dots. Another cooldown that we'll want to weave together with Deathmark is Vanish. Vanish on its own isn't a great cooldown, but it does grant us a moment of stealth, and certain abilities that we have as an Assassination rogue scale with stealth. Primarily the ability of Garrote. With improved Garrote, Garrote deals additional damage when used from stealth. And with the ability of Shroudedification, Garrote deals even more damage and generates additional comp points, also when used from stealth. Because Deathmark amps up and doubles up all of our effects, we want to make sure that we have an empowered version of Garrote available during the Deathmark window. So we're going to be using Vanish not to gain a damage buff, but rather to get an empowered version of Garrote to tie together into our Deathmark. So you want to combine those cooldowns together fairly regularly. Now, Deathmark Burst and Vanish Burst is only one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is going to be the burst cooldown of Kingsbane, which is on a 1-minute cooldown, whereas Deathmark is on a 2-minute cooldown. Kingsbane is a potent poison that will deal instant damage to the target as well as some fall-off damage over 14 seconds. However, each time you apply a lethal poison to the target, whether it is through auto attacks or through envenoms, you increase the damage over time component of Kingsbane by 20% up to a maximum cap of 1000% more damage. Therefore, you want to use as many envenoms and make sure to keep auto attacking the enemy and get as many poison applications as possible in order to ramp up the damage of Kingsbane. And we're going to be combining other cooldowns together inside of our Kingsbane windows to make sure that the ability deals the most amount of damage. One of those cooldowns is going to be the ability of Shiv. When we Shiv an enemy, we put a debuff on him that makes it take additional nature as well as bleed damage for 8 seconds. With the talent of Lightweight Shiv, we have 2 charges to Shiv, and we'll try to make sure that Kingsbane is available during both of those charges of Shiv. Another talent we're going to be using in order to buff the damage of Kingsbane is Subtlety, which has multiple uses. Subtlety has 3 charges and a minute cooldown for each one of these charges. When using Subtlety, you immediately regain 100 energy, but also you increase your mastery by 13 or almost 14% for 6 seconds. Subtlety will be used primarily together within Kingsbane windows, either to give us additional energy if we have extra charges to work with, but we will always save a charge for the tail end of Kingsbane when it's at its strongest to make sure that it benefits from the mastery damage increase, since our mastery buffs the damage of our poisons and Kingsbane counts as a poison. To effectively execute Kingsbane Burst, you need to be able to weave it into your basic rotation. So you'll take the basic gameplay of Mutilating, Slice and Dice, Garrote, Rupture, and Envenom that we talked about before, but you'll need to find a way to weave in Kingsbane as part of that rotation. And the best way to do that is to start that combo, and I'm going to do that combo by itself without executing the rotation, just so you can see what it looks like standalone, is by starting with Shiv and then going into Kingsbane. Have a weak card that tells you exactly when you should reshiv the target in order to make sure you get the most amount of value from Kingsbane. At about 8 seconds, you want to be able to reshiv the target, and at 6 seconds, you want to make sure to pop a Subtlety. But during that window, you're able to make sure that the entirety of duration of Kingsbane is amplified by Shiv all the way to the tail end. And in the last 6 seconds, you want to make sure to use at least 1 charge of Subtlety to make sure that you're getting that extra mastery buff towards the tail end of that Kingsbane. And you want to weave that combo in between of your entire normal plain Assassination Rogue rotation. From there on, once you can do both the base rotation as well as the Kingsbane Burst, all you have to do is then find a way to line up all those cooldowns to make sure that they're available simultaneously. At the very beginning in your opener, we'll be going for a setup that allows us to use Deathmark as well as Vanish for Empowered Garrotes, together with Kingsbane, Shivs, as well as Subtlety in order to maximize our burst damage from the very get-go. After about a minute, you'll have access to Kingsbane, but not Deathmark, and you should use Kingsbane all on its own. It is still worth doing, even without Deathmark. If you use Kingsbane as soon as it's back up and available, then by the time Kingsbane is back up for a third time, you should be able to combine it together with Deathmark. So ideally, every minute, your burst should look like this. Deathmark together with Kingsbane during your opener. After a minute, Kingsbane combo all by itself. After the 2-minute mark, Deathmark as well as Kingsbane, and the minute following after, you should be able to go back to Kingsbane by itself, and the minute after that, combine the two abilities together until the boss or the encounter is eventually dead. And from there, we can go on into the opener of how we end up playing Assassination Rogue, at least in pure single target situations. However, if you are a Deathstalker, you're going to want to also incorporate the ability of Echo and Reprimand, which I wanted to kind of save it at the very tail end after we get through the basics of Assassination. So Echo and Reprimand is an ability, is something we'll be utilizing in order to get through our stacks of Deathstalker's Mark as quickly as possible. Now, when you use the ability, when amplified by the talent of Resonant Clarity, Echo and Reprimand is an ability that costs only 10 energy at a 45-second cooldown and generates 2 combo points. It also marks your future combo points with this nice kind of radical that will actually turn your combo points blue. What that means is that combo point is empowered. So even if you're spending 3 combo points into a finisher like a Rupture, it'll actually treat it as if you spent 7 combo points into that finisher instead. Same thing can be said about the abilities such as Envenom or any damage-focused finisher. If you spend combo points on that empowered combo point, instead of treating it like a 5 combo point finisher, instead of treating it like a 7 combo point finisher, making it much more potent. All you have to do with Echo and Reprimand is add it into your rotation and put this ability on cooldown at all times. Now the modification we'll see with Fatebound is, instead of going for Echo and Reprimand, we'll take the 2 points down from here, leave it into lethality for a bit more crit damage and crit chances, but also we pick up Cold Blood, because it synergizes with Fatebound specifically, causing your next 2 Envenoms to be a guaranteed critical strikes, while also being able to angle and have your dice lean, or not dice, but coins lean in a very specific direction so you can get better chains for your coins with Hand of Fate. And the best way to use Cold Blood is, just like Echo and Reprimand, put this ability on cooldown. The only time you may want to delay Cold Blood is if you just pressed Deathmark, and after your first finisher, after you use the ability of Deathmark, then you can follow through with a Cold Blood, just to make sure that you're getting the most amount of value when it comes to your dice flipping, since Deathmark is going to activate Edge Case and give you more coin flips that are going to be in your favor. It's a bit of a passive mechanic, but essentially it allows you to continue a chain of coins, either getting the tails, which deals cosmic damage, or heads, which increases your damage done by a considerable amount. Now, in an ideal opener, you first want to make sure that all of your poisons are enabled before you start the encounter. This is something you'll want to start paying attention to, especially as a new rogue player. As a Fatebound rogue, you want to start off with an ambush in order to get the Deathstalker's Mark immediately on the target. Follow up with a Garrote into a Rupture, which generates a combo point with spikes, which we invest into a Slice and Dice. Then we follow up with an Echo and Reprimand ability into Envenom, into a Deathmark, Shiv, Kingsbane, and you're proceeding with your rotation while making sure to reshift the target to make sure that you're getting maximum value from your Kingsbane. But the rest of the rotation is actually pretty normal. As your Garrote is about to fall off, it's a good idea in the opener to vanish to apply an empowered Garrote during that window to make sure that you're still getting the maximum effect out of the bleed from whatever's left over of your Deathmark. Again, make sure you're using both Subtlety as well as Shift towards the tail end of that Kingsbane. In the description of this video, I'll have a link to that weak aura that makes it a little bit easier for you to manage the shift windows around the Kingsbane playstyle. As for the Fatebound rogue, you're not going to be starting off with an ambush. Instead, you're going to go immediately into a Garrote, afterwards Mutilate to build some combo points, and then you Rupture. This is going to generate additional combo points from the Bone Spike, which you sink into a Slice and Dice. From there on, you use Mutilates or Modified Ambushes until you have at least 5 combo points, Deathmark, Envenom, Shiv, Kingsbane window. Then you proceed with the entire rotation, making sure to use your delayed Cold Blood because of the way that it functions with Fatebound, while also making sure to reshift the target and use Subtlety during the last few seconds of a Kingsbane. Also, you want to make sure to vanish Garrote as your initial empowered Garrote is about to fall off, just to make sure that it gets the most value inside of the Deathmark window. And from there, you go into your normal plane rotation, trying to make sure to maximize the effectiveness of your next Kingsbane a minute later. Now, when it comes to AoE content, you shouldn't overthink it too much. For the most part, we are going to be leveraging abilities such as Corrode, which can generate additional combo points from stealth, as well as Indiscriminate Carnage, which allows Rupture and Corrode to cleave to multiple targets. So in the opener, you want to go kind of crazy, spamming Corrodes and Ruptures to spread those bleeds to as many targets as humanly possible. Though if you're playing Deathstalker, you want to make sure to weave in at least one ambush from stealth to mark a singular target. Afterwards, build a couple of combo points and then spread Crimson Tempest to everything around you, and make sure to activate Assassinate at least once. Mark one of the enemies with a Mutilate to activate Caustic Spatter, and then you follow through with the Deathmark Kingsbane Burst combo, using Phantom Knights to build combo points and mostly prioritizing Envenom while Kingsbane window is active to make sure that it benefits from the Caustic Spatter AoE. It's kind of like you'll be able to get on the opener, pot up the bleeds on everybody, and then you follow through with a single target burst rotation as long as Kingsbane is active, and once Kingsbane and Deathmark are both gone, you're back to managing bleeds and managing dots and trying to maintain all of those effects on nearby enemies, making sure to reactivate Caustic Spatter, and then sink in Envenoms whenever you don't need to reapply any of your bleeds, and you continue with that rotation up until Kingsbane is back up, where then you want to have more of that Kingsbane type of focus damage, while still playing around your Deathstalker or Trickster based abilities. Alright, now I want to talk about how to gear a rogue for Season 1. It's a pretty long project, so hopefully we'll get through this part pretty quickly. When it comes to stats, it's a little bit still up in the air, and stats may completely change, but as of right now, based on the latest beta build, agility is going to be the most #1 stat that you're going to want to invest into. So in most cases, if an item, unless it's rings or necks which don't have agility, if it's an item that grants agility, and if it's a higher item level than what you're currently wearing, a good chance is it's probably going to be an upgrade over anything else you have. Otherwise, when it comes to secondary stats, some stats are going to be better than others. Critical Strike not only grants you a chance for your abilities to deal double the damage, but we also mentioned before how it can affect your combo point building. Because Critical Strikes can deal and make some of your resource generation more efficient, it ends up being the best stat right now for Assassination Rogue. Followed very, very closely, if not equally, to Mastery, which amplifies the damage of our poisons, as well as bleeds, which is a huge portion of our overall damage, and this is why we're going to be investing primarily into crit and Mastery when it comes to stats. Haste is a stat that's not as heavy right now or not as necessary, but it's still needed in a little bit, in small doses. Haste increases our attack speed as well as energy regeneration, but it also affects our dots like poisons and bleeds by allowing those dot ticks to occur more frequently inside of the same window. It's not as necessary of a stat since Assassination Rogue offsets a lot of our necessary energy with Subtlety inside of those Kingsbane windows, so we'd never really struggle for energy inside of big burst situations. So haste does not end up being as big of a stat, but it definitely can be. The best way to find out how much haste you need is honestly to sim. And the final stat you're not really going to need, but maybe in a little bit in small doses, is Versatility. It's a great defensive stat, but it's not scaling nearly as well when it comes to offensive power for us compared to Critical Strike and Mastery. But if anything, if you're not exactly sure which items are going to be your best upgrade, the best thing you can do for your character if you're serious about playing Assassination Rogue in War Within is to sim yourself with the Raidbot Sim add-on. So download the add-on, go to Raidbot's website, then you can plug in your character and then find out what items you have and which ones would be an upgrade. You can run sims in order to find out how much damage you should be doing in single target, in AoE, or in a variety of different situations, and you can compare items, talents, gems, and stats, and enchants, and all those things against one another to find the perfect build for your rogue. It is a useful add-on and a useful tool, and if you are serious about playing your rogue in this expansion for Season 1, I definitely will start using sims to try to optimize your character as effectively as possible. However, even if you're not going to be doing sims or not as aggressively doing sims, I still want to give you a bit of guidance as to what items you should try to prioritize once Season 1 begins, what weapons you can get, and what crafted items you should also be able to get for your rogue in order to increase your overall effectiveness. For Season 1 content, Assassination Rogues are going to prioritize primarily trinkets that come from dungeons. One of the better ones are going to be the Arakara Sagbrood from the Arakara dungeon. It provides you a decent bit of haste, but also consistent amounts of agility, as well as a little bit of nature damage. Another really good option comes from the dungeon Siege of Borealis from the second boss, which is the Deadeye Spyglass, where your attacks and abilities have a chance to mark the target with a dead ahead debuff, and attacking that marked target increases your critical strike chance, stack it up to 5 times, which further improves your damage as well as your resource generation. The last trinket that's worth noting is in Grim Battle from the first boss, General Umbris. It's called Discardant's Grace. It's a trinket that grants you agility, but also a big bulk of mastery on a 2-minute cooldown. This 2-minute cooldown lines up perfectly with our ability of Deathmark, which is also 2 minutes. So we'll be synergizing the trinket together with Deathmark in order to amplify our burst damage output. When it comes to your weapons, particularly your daggers, you just want whatever got the highest item level. But if you are trying to farm certain weapons with the best secondary stats, in the Dungeon City of Threads from the final boss Izzo, you can get Splice and Dice, which has a great set of stats with plenty of haste, plenty of crit, and it's probably one of the better daggers if you can get it on a high item level. However, if you plan to raid in this expansion, then Nexus Princess Kaiveza has a dagger called Regicide, which has a decent stat spread as well, with a bit of haste and a bit of mastery. And if you can get it on a high item level, that'll be a solid weapon to invest into. When it comes to making crafted items, however, there's quite a bit of volatility, as when they might end up buffing and nerfing some of the different crafted items because currently embellishments are a little bit undertuned and are not performing as well as they could be. So if anything, since sparks come in limited quantities, I wouldn't start crafting your items immediately when you watch this video. Instead, I would wait a little bit longer in case we get some kind of an update when it comes to crafted items and embellishments. However, if nothing changes, the best embellishments you're going to want to get is on plain items, plain leather pieces, ideally bracers and boots, which you'll want to add an embellishment towards. Specific embellishment that you want to go for is the Dawnlight Lining, which, while above 80% health, you gain additional critical strike chance. And finally, we have enchants as well as consumables, and I put together a list of all the consumables and enchants that you'll want to watch out for and acquire. Some of these are not going to be available day one until more people get to storm the new Nurbar Palace raid, because some of the enchants as well as items you can only get from some of the boss encounters in that instance. But ideally, when it comes to your weapon, at least from pure raid content, you want to get the enchant of Authority of the Depths. For your cloak, you'll want the enchant of the Winged Grace, with a chest of Crystalline Radiance. Your bracers should be enchanted with Chant of the Armored Avoidance for defense, while legs should be imbued with Stormbound armor kits. Your boots should be enchanted with Defender's March, and your rings should ideally be enchanted either with Radiant Critical Strike or Cursed Haste if you're severely behind on your haste values. As for the consumables you'll want to use while raiding or doing dungeons in the War Within, ideally your flask should be the Flask of Alchemical Chaos, while your Combat Omnis Potion, which should be used together with Deathmark, should be Tempered Potion. For health, you can run the Algari Health Potion, which is great for additional survivability, while your weapons should be enhanced with the Ironclaw Whetstone. You can splurge for an Augment Ruin, though at the beginning of a season, those are going to be mighty expensive, so I wouldn't get too many of those unless you're really serious into raiding endgame content. For your food, ideally you would have the Feast, usually of the Midnight Masquerade, but most foods that grant you crit or agility will also do just fine. For your gems, you'll want to pick up at least one diamond. Ideally, you'll want the Culminating Blasphemite, which adds you additional critical strike damage for every unique gem that you have. You may need to sim your character in order to get the most ideal combination of gems. Otherwise, when you're not running the Culminating Blasphemite, you'll want to fill the rest of your slots with Masterful Ruby, which provides you with a little bit of critical strike as well as mastery. Although with gems, you can always sim your character in order to find a more optimal combination. As always, if you guys did enjoy this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you got any questions regarding Assassination Rogues going forward, or to access the written version of this guide, which I've listed in the information section of the Discord channel below. Also, let me know all your thoughts in terms of which rogue spec do you think you're most likely going to be maining heading into the first season of the War Within. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.